You only get one chance to make a good first impression, and that doubly applies to the world of indie video games, which typically lack the budget and the resources of your Resident Evils or Call of Duties. However, one small night managed to survive certain death from a bland Flash game to a beloved indie phenomenon that built upon its prototype's every flaw, creating something magical as a result. In the early 2000s, there was a fast-rising website specializing in many forms of user-generated content that would shape the internet for years to come. That website is Newgrounds, best known for being the Wild West of Flash animation and cultivating up-and-coming smaller passion projects, some of which would eventually skyrocket into popularity. In August of 2014, one such precursor of future indie success was published by the name of Hungry Night, a survival game that required players to kill insects in order to stave off starvation. Hungry Night was not very good. In fact, it received a 1 out of 5 rating among Newgrounds users, with the only bright spot being the game's unique character designs. The combat was too simplistic with few enemy variations, the surrounding environment was plain and uninteresting, and there was no reason to care about who this hungry being was or their murder-based objective. Actually, upon further inspection, doesn't the little adventurer you play as in Hungry Night look just a bit familiar? Realized through a Kickstarter campaign that hit its goal and then some, Hollow Knight would become a major success story that would sell over 2.8 million copies, achieve universal acclaim from critics and fans alike, secure an upcoming sequel in Hollow Knight SILKSONG, and Destructoid's review would even go as far as calling it a masterpiece of gaming if there ever was one. Of course, the term masterpiece can be controversial among even the biggest gaming releases, but as many who have played Hollow Knight can attest, it's a statement as true as the bug-inhabited kingdom of Hollow Nest is doomed. Born from the ashes of Hungry Knight, a humble prototype developed by Ari Gibson and William Pellin for a game jam, Hollow Knight would learn from the mistakes of its older sibling. Team Cherry evolved from Hungry Knight's singular bland level and 3 enemy variants through Hollow Knight's diseased realm of Hollow Nest. Ari Gibson drew not only the backgrounds, but designed the characters in his many sketchbooks before finalizing them in the game. He took inspiration from various species of bugs and insects, making them more endearing and easier on the eyes. I mean, come on, would you rather save this scrub or this horrible abomination? Unlike its shallow predecessor with its simple, unremarkable controls, Hollow Knight grounds itself through sharp, deliberate movement. Taking a page from the Mega Man series, the developers wanted to ensure that players had complete control of the knight at all times during difficult platforming sections and boss encounters. Movement plays a big role in how Hollow Knight moderates difficulty to provide a challenging experience, but not necessarily a punishing one. A Souls game may roll a boulder at you from the darkness or let loose a volley of arrows at random and expect you to have lightning-fast reflexes to avoid them, and is otherwise content to just kill you outright and hope you've learned your lesson in the School of Hard Knocks. Hollow Knight, instead, wants you to know that it doesn't quite relish in your misery and suffering. You're always the master of your destiny, no matter how difficult a situation may initially seem. If you make a mistake, you know exactly how to correct it next time. Hungry Knight, in comparison, was tragically easy. In a perfect bout of irony against its focus on survival, you pretty much had to go out of your way to die. There was one small taste of things to come, however, with the game's biggest enemy. Instead of walking up to it, pushing a button, and watching it die with little resistance, this encounter actually required players to move or dash out of the way of its overarching swing attacks and follow up with a strike of their own. Though this was a very minor interaction in the grand scheme of a shallow experience, this small back and forth would be greatly expanded upon in Hollow Knight when it comes to enemy engagement. To illustrate how the game combines movement and difficulty to create a fluid experience, we'll spend some time in the Forgotten Crossroads, the game's first major area. Now, for convenience, let's assume that even though there's very little linearity in Hollow Knight, the first major encounter you have is with the False Knight. He's big and intimidating, and if you haven't quite been paying attention, he'll easily send you packing to the nearest bench. In typical boss fashion, it's simple enough to recognize the False Knight's pattern outright while fighting him. But Hollow Knight does something subtle to clue players in on how to deal with him. This is the Leaping Husk, a very common enemy in the Forgotten Crossroads. When they see you, they'll leap out and attack you. Your response? Move to avoid, strike once or twice, and boom, no problem. On your way to the False Knight, it's likely you'll encounter the HUSK Guard, your first challenge before you get to the big boy. The HUSK Guard has 2 attacks, an overhead slam and a shockwave. Your response? Move away from the slam, jump over the shockwave, find your openings to attack, win the day. With these 2 enemies in mind, you'll notice that one of the False Knight's attacks seems to leap into the air before doing an overhead strike. It's almost as if you've seen something similar already and have a rough idea of how to react to it. Go figure. With a few unique twists, the bulk of the False Knight's moves are combinations of the enemy encounters you've had in the area already, and this is the least of Hollow Knight's satisfying surprises. So far, we've got dynamic combat, fluid, purposeful movement, and wonderful hand-drawn 2D environments, all of which are great advancements from the game's Newgrounds origins. But above all else, players are meant to explore, a balancing act Team Cherry adeptly handled by the way of the mapping system. Ari Gibson would explain, "We wanted players to feel like an explorer entering uncharted lands, so we knew that the map couldn't work like a Metroid-style way. It couldn't know the shape of the landscape before the players did, but it also couldn't be so unfriendly that a player would turn off the game in frustration. When players discover a new area, they're left on their own whims. No immediate map, no guidance, no plan. With no way to explore any section fully without later movement-based abilities, players are encouraged to forge their own way forward. Hidden treasures, characters, bosses, and entire optional areas may be just out of reach, enticing players with the promise of something new and exciting around every corner, even when backtracking. While Hungry Night only contained one relatively empty level with few characters to interact with and no overarching story to keep players coming back for more, after successfully beating back starvation by absorbing the essence of your enemies, players come across a mysterious altar. There, on the stone slab, appears to be the corpse of the knight, with 3 mysterious glowing faces hovering just above the altar. This may seem like a moment that doesn't mean much, but it sets up the way Hollow Knight tells a meaningful, subtle story without bombastic cinematic cutscenes. The Kingdom of Hallownest is a character in and of itself, full of unfulfilled ambitions, outright delusion, and sorrow. Going from place to place, you truly experience the downfall of a civilization, the overgrowth of the Queen's Gardens, the lonely majesty of the City of Tears, and, if you manage to find it, the idyllic dream that is the White Palace in all its overconfident splendor. Without ever having to explicitly say it in a wordy cutscene, you eventually come to know the truth through the environments and the eclectic cast of characters you meet along the way. You learn of the Pale King, his lust for an everlasting kingdom, and his gift of higher knowledge and awareness to his subjects in exchange for their servitude. You discover the Radiance, the forgotten god who poisoned Hallownest to force her former followers to remember their deity. You're told about the conflict between the 2 higher beings, one that birthed the legendary Hollow Knight. And when it's finally time to face the now corrupted Hollow Knight, the supposed savior of Hallownest, you'd naturally expect a boss fight of the ages, and you get exactly that at first. You're using everything you've learned throughout your journey to combat this fallen guardian, and it's as much a final test of skill and will for the player as it is a fitting battle to decide Hallownest's future. But eventually, unexpectedly, the Hollow Knight drives their nail through their own chest over and over. Everything changes. Deep down in the heart of the Radiance's influence is the Hollow Knight, fighting the infection, doing whatever they can to bring you closer to success where they failed. This moment is the perfect finale to everything Team Cherry set out to achieve. From the boss battles to exploring Hallownest's depths, Hollow Knight builds up your comfort and familiarity, then snatches the bug-covered rug from beneath you while ensuring you're never truly lost or beaten because of everything it's taught you. While these elements would create an experience that's close to gaming perfection, it's not outright reaching it. It's important to remember that even perfection has its imperfect roots, and that should never be forgotten. And just as the Knight has an obligation to make up for the Hollow Knight's tragic, unforeseen failures, the game itself retroactively redeemed the deeply flawed Hungry Knight. In the pain and disappointment of Team Cherry's initial misstep came a critically acclaimed, beloved successor that became one of gaming's must-play experiences and indeed, a masterpiece in the medium if there ever was one. But what do you guys think? Is Hollow Knight deserving of the accolades and hype? Let us know in the comments. For those of you who have stuck with us to the end, thank you so much. and be sure to like this video and subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming.